Hello, I am Barry Rogers. I am the visiting professor of practice in psychological and behavioural science at the London School of Economics, and I am an editorial fellow here at the Institute, where I participated in the monthly programme in April 2024. What I wanted to do today was to give you a flavour of what it was I did at the Institute, what I came here to look into, to research, to try and understand, and not just to give you a summary of that, but to link it to something that happened while I was here, how I changed my thinking, how something unanticipated came to, as I said, impact the direction of that. But before I go there, let me say a little bit more. I've got another dimension to my role. I'm a pracademic. I sit at the intersection between academia and practice. Specifically, I design and deliver customized executive education inside global organizations. And I witness a phenomenon, I witness a problem in that, and I've done it for over 25 years, that I can do something very successful in the classroom. I can get people to know things. By the end of the week, they can test that they have learned something. They look as if they've enjoyed themselves, they're satisfied, and most of all, they're committed. They say they're committed to taking this back and doing things differently in the workplace. Yet, I watch them walk out of the room and actively forget everything we've talked about as they go back into the context of action, traction, and distraction in everyday life. Now, this problem has intrigued me. It's fascinated me. It's been the defining feature of my scholarly and personal life. And because of that, I guess like you, the first thing I did, I thought to myself, I can't be the first person to think about this. So I went back to the literature, and I found back in the early noughties that there was not a lot within the literature. I literally reviewed thousands of articles and books and various things. And you see that actually what happens after programs, there's not a lot there. And what is there, the dominant way of thinking about this, the transfer of training literature, is very reductionist, very individualistic, and it's methodologically and conceptually not capable of painting a picture of this landscape. So, with that in mind, I thought to myself, I need to do something about that. Because if this was not going to be useful in some shape or form, what was the point of the 25 years that I've spent doing what I'm doing? What is the purpose of my time? And on top of that, this is a huge industry. In the last year alone in the US, $78 billion was spent on large corporate programs without any real sense how that money has an impact. So the year 2006 was a real turning point for me in terms of my thinking, this research. And two things happened in that year. First, I was approached by the chief executive of a large global energy company to help them navigate towards the energy transition away from fossil fuels, and specifically where I was concerned, to work with the senior deal makers. Those that shape the deals, that will shape the country, that will shape our energy future, and really help them to question some of their deep taken for granted assumptions about what constituted value in a very different world. Now, I have an interest in sustainability. This was fascinating for me. It was something I wanted to do, and it was something where I thought I could have a real impact. But I had a problem, and the problem was still this whole issue about thinking, if we go this route about how we do this with formal programs, how do I know that this is not just some form of elaborate and expensive greenwashing? And that's when I went back to the work of Donald Schoen. Okay? Schoen had this fabulous book, The Reflective Practitioner, and deep inside the first chapter, there is an image that Schoen comes up with called The Mountaintop and the Swamp. And as I read this, it really helped me think differently about this distinction about the way we think, we know, we operate when we're on a program, and how we feel, we know, we operate afterwards. Two very different experiences. And Sean points to this distinction that we're on the top of the mountaintop. Academics have the ability to look back at their data with clear sight in the clear light of day, and everything looks as if it can come together in a relatively coherent type of fashion. But the people that they are talking to are in the swamp. They don't have that luxury. They're dealing with the minutiae of politics and power and everything that comes together on a day-to-day basis. And that dialogue between the two is a real problem. But this was a superb way for me of trying to understand the distinction that I was seeing between what was happening on the program and what was happening afterwards. I needed a way of capturing the experience of the swamp. And so I went back to the programs I was doing, and between 2006 and 2012, in 40 different programs around the world in different organizations, I asked them to do a simple exercise. At the end of the program, I gave each of the participants a small box, and I asked them to put on the box what it was that got in the way of them doing what they said they were going to do when they left. And as I looked at that and I categorized it, one thing came out more than anything else: their relationship with time. 40%, over 40% of the responses were time or time related. So a way of capturing the essence of the swamp was capturing that nature of time, not just linear time, but non-linear time. The idea of flow, philosophy, but most of all, distractions and interruptions. Well, we are out of the office, and it's a nice swamp, but this is closer to the experience of the swamp. This is the everyday setting that participants return to. And I had a way of thinking about that. I had a way of capturing it. I now needed a way of making sense of it, some form of tool or methodology. And I decided to try and visualize it, and visualize the nature of time. And as I said, not just in the form of a clock that is linear, but to capture all those dimensions of time, linear and non-linear. And I decided to do that in the form of an electronic diary. And the work that I have done as part of my time at the Institute is to tell the story of the development, the evolution, and the implementation of that tool. That is, I think, the largest, longest, most comprehensive study of its type that there has been. It's a process study. It's an action-orientated process study that spans 18 years. It deals with 1,800 participants. I spent 355 days of my life, 24-hour days. The nature of the company that I was working for had a hotel in its head office. I literally was there all that time. It allowed me to pull together an ethnography that is over and has over 5,000 notes as part of it. There are 115 formal interviews. And the implementation process has in itself 350 interviews plus 60 group studies, okay? All of that came together and was analyzed in a amended form of process tracing that looked at the data not just after the fact, but also as it was happening. And what did I find? I found, as I thought, that even if you leave these programs full of good intentions, full of good commitments, that in the period immediately after the program, there is a huge fall-off in terms of intentionality. Something like 40% of that commitment you had as you left was gone after 18 days. But what this also allowed me to do was to paint a picture of what that period after the program looked like. And it was very deep and rich in dimensions of temporality. It was full of contradictions. It was full of this liminal sense of the temporal expectations of others. But most of all, it was full of practices that were deeply imbued with temporality and were deeply defined by identity. And it was getting to those practices and using the tool and the methodology to be able to work with those practices that allowed us really over a period of time to bring about some considerable change. The evaluation associated with the project, as you'll see in terms of what I've written, was quite comprehensive and actually in the end proved to be quite successful. But there was a sting in the tail. There was a sting in the tail about the level of analysis that I was employing. And I wanted to come to the Institute to look at what I thought was what I wanted to focus on, which was expanding the level of analysis. But it wasn't until I came here and some of the conversations that I got involved in that I realized that even I was not seeing the full implications of what I needed to do. So welcome to the dining area of the Institute. And at 12:30 every afternoon, this place is buzzing. It's buzzing with the conversations that take place between the various fellows that are here. And that's a really important part of the story I want to tell today. And I'll come back to that in a moment. If you remember, a central theme, a central conceptual theme of my work was this idea of visibility. What we see, what we don't see, and how we enable ways of seeing things that are very familiar. And I wanted to do that with time. I wanted to use a visualization to be able to enable people to see the type of, as we said, capture the idea of the swamp and give people the freedom, the flexibility, the agency to make better decisions about what they want to do and how they want to change. And that was fine. That worked. Technically, it has worked itself into what is a long document, as you will see, that I've produced after my fellowship. It's a process study that evolves over 18 years, and I've broken it down into those 18 years. But there was a sting in the tail. There was a sting in the tail, something that I had to deal with in terms of how I was doing what I was doing. What was the level of analysis? And I was focusing primarily on the individual. I was making context visible, but what I was missing and what I knew I had to do when I came back to the Institute was to think more broadly about the level of the group, the team, the organization. And I had incorporated that into the last parts of the study, and I thought I had made the changes. But I also felt something uncomfortable about the nature of the study. I knew something had changed in the wider environment, not just around the what and the how of the study, but the why, the logic I did it in the first place. And that was to enable the transition to a very different world, literally to help save the planet in terms of what we do and how we do with that move to renewables. Some of you may be aware of the fact that that renewables discourse has also been tied up with another narrative around energy security. And that has had a big impact with a lot of the fossil fuel companies in terms of how they're focusing back on a lot of their traditional businesses. That did not make me feel good. But I didn't have a way of articulating that, of making sense of that, until I came to the Institute. And that brings me back to here, because I was sitting in this spot when I spoke with a colleague who was a fellow, and she had a very different perspective. She had a wider level of knowledge. She was a sociologist, and she made me think about time, which is central to what I wrote in my study here, at a very different level, at an ideological level. How time can be used by elites to foster their own interest, to focus more on the present. It's very important in terms of time at a broader level within this project to think about very different futures, but that is not happening at the moment. There's more of an element in terms of looking to energy security as a way of sort of the old ways of the past, okay? That really changed the way I thought about this work. It changed what I actually did afterwards, and it changed the nature of how I have interacted with that company subsequently. In effect, in April 2024, while I was here, I walked away from the transaction. That way of thinking, was incredibly important to this. That's what the Institute did. And that's something I'd like to explore in a little bit more detail with the director of the Institute, Sadi Lalou.